So today's source material for this deep dive is, well, it's essentially a philosophical zip file.
That is the perfect way to describe it, honestly.
Right, because for you listening, we are looking at a single physical page today. It's this tiny, maybe 3-inch square of paper from what looks like a daily meditation or a reflection book.
Just a few paragraphs.
Barely even that.
Right.
But what is compressed into this tiny space is this absolute collision course of primal instincts. I mean, we are talking about the paralyzing fear of poverty, the anatomy of a writer's creative block, and
It's an incredible exercise in brevity. I mean, most philosophical texts, they take hundreds of pages to map out the human condition. But this single page, it attempts to build a complete framework for navigating our deepest anxieties using just 4 short quotes,
2 words: applied faith.
which is such a loaded phrase, but we'll get to that.
We will definitely get to that. And below that header, the page is divided into 2 daily entries. There's an entry for March 15th and an entry for March 16th.
And each of those days features 2 distinct quotes.
Right. We have thoughts from the writer Natalie Goldberg, author Mary Paulson Lauda, and 2 appearances by the self-help pioneer Napoleon Hill. So our mission today is to figure out how these 4 seemingly unrelated thoughts actually interact.
Because they really do form a cohesive thesis.
Yeah, they do. We're going to examine the underlying mechanisms of why we quit, why we're so terrified of other people, and how this one page constructs a manual for what it actually means to, apply faith in the real world.
Well, to understand how to navigate this whole framework, we first have to identify why we stop moving in the first place. The urge to quit is universal, but the first quote on this page suggests that our understanding of why we quit is, well, it's fundamentally flawed.
Right. This is the Natalie Goldberg quote from March 15th.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
She writes, "Sometimes when you think you are done, it is just the edge of beginning. Probably that's why we decide we're done. It's getting scary. We are touching down onto something real. It is beyond the point when you think you are done that often something strong comes out."
I love that phrase, the edge of beginning. She is completely dismantling the concept of the finish line there.
He really is.
It reminds me of the false summit in mountain climbing. I don't know if you've ever experienced that.
Oh, where you think you're at the top, but you're definitely not.
Yes. You're hiking up this brutal incline, your lungs are just burning, muscles failing, and you look up and you see the peak. So you push with, every ounce of energy you have left to reach that ridge, fully expecting to just plant your flag and be done.
But then you pull yourself over the edge.
And you realize the ridge was just an optical illusion. It was hiding the true peak, which is, still another 1,000 feet straight up. And the hardest, most treacherous part of the climb is actually still ahead of you.
By the real mountain.
Exactly. And Goldberg is pointing out that in our creative projects or our careers or even our relationships, we are actively choosing to plant our flag at that false summit because we just don't want to face the real climb.
Well, we mistake the illusion for the reality because the illusion feels safe. We tell ourselves this narrative that, oh, the work is complete or the relationship has just run its natural course. And we do that specifically to avoid the psychological friction of continuing.
Okay, but let's push back on Goldberg's premise here for a second, though. Because she claims we decide we're done because it's getting scary. But distinguishing between fear and genuine physical burnout is, it's incredibly difficult in the moment.
Oh, absolutely. It's very blurry.
Right. Like when you've been grinding on a startup for 3 years with 0 traction, or you're stuck in a toxic dynamic, the exhaustion is palpable. How can we definitively say that a person is stopping because they're terrified of touching down onto something real rather than just, being completely out of gas?
That's a great question. And I think the distinction really lies in the difference between depletion and vulnerability. So exhaustion is a state of physical or cognitive depletion. Your battery's just empty.
Okay.
But the fear Goldberg describes, that's a physiological reaction to vulnerability. Think about it when you're just operating on the surface level, going through the motions at your job, making polite small talk. Your brain's threat detection system is pretty much dormant.
Because you aren't touching down onto anything real.
Exactly. But the second you're writing, or your business pivot, or even a deep conversation, scrapes against the raw nerve of your actual identity, your amygdala activates.
Which is the brain's alarm bell.
Yes, the amygdala goes off. And the thing is, the brain is remarkably bad at differentiating between a threat to your physical survival and the threat to your ego.
Wow, so it perceives an emotional risk as a literal physical threat.
Precisely. You stop not because you lack the energy to take another step, but because continuing requires you to abandon your current safe conception of who you are. The mechanism of stopping is literally an act of self-preservation.
So when Goldberg promises that something strong comes out if you push past this point, getting there means you have to override a biological alarm.
You do, which makes distinguishing between exhaustion and fear even harder. Because if the brain treats an ego threat like a physical threat, taking that next step feels life or death.
And that, honestly, perfectly sets up the tension with the very next quote on the page.
The Napoleon Hill quote.
Right, because immediately underneath Goldberg's thought about, the fear of the creative process, Napoleon Hill introduces this very literal material terror. He writes, "Fear of poverty is the most destructive of fears and also the most difficult to master."
And this editorial choice, placing these two specific fears back to back on March 15th, this is where the text starts to reveal its underlying logic.
Because we move from the abstract fear of getting real directly into the primal fear of absolute destitution.
Right, it's a huge shift.
It really initially reads like a jarring pivot, going from the anxiety of finishing a novel or having a tough conversation straight into the terror of starving in the streets. But if we look at the evolutionary biology you just mentioned, they're inextricable.
They are the exact same fear, just
Yeah.
wearing different masks.
That's so.
Well, for the vast majority of human history, taking a risk, whether that was hunting in a new territory or challenging the social order of the tribe, or just dedicating time to something without an immediate guaranteed return, it was an existential gamble.
Right, there was no safety net.
Exactly. If you failed, you didn't just feel embarrassed. You lost your share of the resources. You lost your protection.
Man, that completely reframes the modern concept of imposter syndrome or like creative block. When I sit down to launch a new venture and I suddenly get this overwhelming urge to say, you know what, this is good enough, I'm done. It's not just an ego issue.
No, it's an evolutionary misfire.
My brain is literally equating the potential failure of a business pitch with starving in the wild.
And that's why Hill categorizes it as the most destructive of fears, because of how it paralyzes the executive function of your brain. The fear of poverty isn't merely anxiety about a low bank balance. It's the anticipation of a total lack of agency.
So it forces you to accept Goldberg's false summit?
Yes, because the unknown terrain ahead threatens your basic access to shelter and food. It's the most difficult to master because your biology is actively fighting your ambition.
Your ambition wants to see the top of the mountain, but your biology just wants to conserve calories and not freeze to death?
Exactly. And this internal paralysis, this war between wanting to create something strong and being terrified of losing everything, it inevitably forces us to look outward for a solution.
Because we can't resolve that level of existential dread in a vacuum.
We really can't. Which brings us to the second half of the page, March 16th, where the focus shifts from how we view our own survival to how we interact with the world around us.
Right, we introduce the variable of other people, which, strangely enough, is the only mechanism capable of soothing that primal alarm bell, but also the very thing that can trigger it.
Yes,
Yep.
the ultimate double-edged sword.
So the first quote in this outward-looking section is from Mary Paulson Lauda. She writes, "We know God wipes away all tears, but it certainly feels good when he uses human hands."
It's a beautiful quote. It grounds the abstract concept of spiritual comfort into a biological reality.
It points directly to our physical hardwiring. Because, you can meditate, you can pray, you can rationalize your fears all day long. But when you are standing at that scary edge of beginning, or when the fear of poverty has you awake at 3 in the morning, an abstract concept cannot lower your heart rate the way a physical human being can.
Because we are talking about the neurology of co-regulation.
Okay, unpack that for us.
So, human beings are pack animals. Our nervous systems are literally designed to sync with the nervous systems of those around us. Think about a terrified child. A parent picking them up physically alters the child's brain chemistry.
Right, the cortisol drops, oxytocin rises.
Exactly. And that biological need for physical reassurance, it doesn't disappear when we become adults. Paulson Lauda is acknowledging that while faith or philosophy provides the framework, the actual delivery mechanism for safety is human connection.
We need the physical presence of the community to signal to our amygdala that the threat has passed. But
Yeah.
the architecture of this page doesn't let us rest in that comfort, does it?
Not at all.
Because right below that beautiful sentiment about human hands, the text delivers just an absolute gut punch. The final quote from March 16 is again from Napoleon Hill, and he writes, "Fear of criticism is almost as general as the fear of poverty."
And here we find the ultimate paradox of human existence, neatly summarized in 2 sentences.
Think about human connection like fire, right? Fire is the fundamental tool of survival. It is the only thing that can cook your food, purify your water, keep you warm when you're freezing in the dark.
Those are the human hands bringing comfort.
Exactly. But that exact same fire, if the wind shifts, can burn your house to the absolute ground and destroy everything you have built. And that destructive capacity, that is the fear of criticism.
The very source of our greatest physiological comfort is simultaneously the source of our most profound anxiety. And notice how Hill doesn't just say we dislike criticism. He equates it directly to the fear of poverty.
Which raises a massive logistical problem for anyone trying to navigate life using this map. I mean, if the fear of someone judging us is genuinely as widespread and deeply rooted as the fear of starvation, aren't we taking an irrational risk by relying on those human hands for comfort?
We are reaching toward the exact fire that we know can burn us.
Exactly.
We are. But again, we have to look at the evolutionary mechanism behind why Hill equates the two. Why does an insult or a bad review or social rejection feel so devastating?
Why does it?
Neuroscience shows us that social rejection activates the exact same neural pathways in the brain, specifically the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, as physical pain.
Really?
Yes. When you're criticized, your brain registers it as a physical injury.
Because in our ancestral environment, social rejection was basically a death sentence.
Exactly the same as the fear of poverty. If your tribe criticized you, decided you were a liability, and cast you out, you didn't just suffer a blow to your self-esteem, you lost the protection of the group.
You couldn't hunt alone, you couldn't stay warm alone.
Right. Social survival was identical to physical survival. So when Hill elevates the fear of criticism to this monumental level, he is validating a very real biological mechanism. Worrying about what other people think isn't just a character flaw or mere vanity. It is a deeply embedded survival strategy firing on all cylinders to keep you inside the safety of the tribe.
Wow. It paints an incredibly daunting picture of the human experience, doesn't it?
It really does.
You're standing at Goldberg's false summit. You're terrified of stepping into the unknown because it might lead to Hill's ruin and poverty.
Ah,
So your only instinct is to reach out for Paulson Lauda's human comfort. But to do so, you have to risk Hill's fear of criticism, which your brain interprets as a physical attack.
we're trapped in a crossfire of evolutionary alarms.
Which is why the single overarching header at the very top of the page is so critical. The page doesn't just list our neuroses, it offers a methodology for operating within them.
Applied faith.
Yes, applied faith. The word applied does a lot of heavy lifting here. We culturally treat faith like a passive feeling, right? It's treated like a cozy blanket you wrap around yourself when the world gets cold. You're just supposed to have faith that the universe will provide, and that belief is supposed to make you feel warm and tranquil.
But applied changes the entire definition.
It takes faith out of the realm of passive comfort and turns it into a verb. Like applied mathematics or applied physics, it is theory tested in the friction of the real world. It makes faith sound like a tool or a shield you actively wield in an arena.
It strips away the passivity entirely. Because applied faith is not the absence of fear. I think a common misconception is that if you have enough faith or enough confidence, the fear of poverty or the fear of criticism will simply evaporate.
But Hill's own words contradict that. He calls these fears the most destructive and difficult to master. He doesn't say you eradicate them. He says you have to master operating around them. So if we look at the practical reality of this, how is faith actually applied in the context of these four quotes? Because looking at the sheer volume of terror outlined here, this doesn't sound like a spiritual exercise. It sounds like a manual for applied survival.
Well, it is applied survival, but elevated from instinct to conscious choice. To apply faith here means making a physical move forward while your amygdala is screaming at you to stop. It is the action taken in the absolute presence of terror.
So practically speaking, applied faith is looking at the false summit of your career or your relationship, feeling the overwhelming exhaustion and the evolutionary urge to stay safe, and actively choosing to push past Goldberg's scary edge of beginning anyway.
Yes, it is launching the business or having the vulnerable conversation while simultaneously hearing the primal voice warning you of ruin. It's feeling the fear of poverty and deciding that the potential of something strong coming out is actually worth the material risk.
And crucially, it means knowing that the people around you have the power to destroy you with their criticism. You know the fire can burn you, but you actively choose to trust that Paulson Lauda's human hands will catch you instead.
You expose yourself to the social pain of rejection on the belief that the co-regulation and comfort of the community will be there.
That synthesis is just the genius of the zip file. The page doesn't offer cheap platitudes. It doesn't tell you to banish negative thoughts or simply be brave. It maps out the exact biological and psychological traps you are going to fall into.
It validates that your fear of failure, ruin, and judgment are all deeply rooted and incredibly powerful. And then it posits that a meaningful life, a life where you touch down onto something real, requires the physical application of forward momentum alongside those fears.
It is staggering that a complete operational manual for human resilience can be compressed into a few square inches of paper. We expect the answers to these massive existential dreads to require, volumes of text, but here we have the entire topography of the human condition laid out in 4 thoughts.
It really forces us to realize that the complexity of our modern anxieties, whether that's career panic, social media judgment, creative burnout, they're all just variations of these ancient foundational fears.
Yeah.
And once you isolate the root, the application of faith becomes a much clearer, albeit difficult, path forward.
It completely shifts how I am going to evaluate my own urges to quit. Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. And as always, we want to leave you, the listener, with a specific lens to apply to your own life based on the source material we've unpacked.
Something to really sit with.
Exactly. So I want you to look at a project, a relationship, or a personal goal in your life where you have recently decided that you are done. You've called it quits, you've parked the car, and you've told yourself the journey is over.
The false summit.
Right. Ask yourself honestly, are you truly finished? Or have you just reached the scary edge of the beginning? And look closely at the underlying mechanism driving your decision. Which of Napoleon Hill's 2 great evolutionary fears, the fear of poverty and loss of resources, or the fear of criticism and social exile, is secretly the thing convincing you to stop right before something real comes out?